Cool. Awesome. Uh, this is week 3 or 4. I already lost track. Um, and I so wish that I'm in Hong Kong to hang out with you guys. I can't wait. But now it's 3 weeks quarantine, so I'm definitely not coming back. Uh, and today we're super excited to Huey Lin to join us. I hate to butcher the name Huey, but I'm super excited. Actually, we met online. The first time we met was actually, I think Founders Hong Kong now been around for about a couple years now, and we hosted Hussein from Hoxton Venture from the UK. He's a really awesome VCs, and Hui actually joined us as at our event as one of the attendees, and I found out that she's super awesome. So definitely wanted to recruit her to join our community. So today, yeah, super honored. Worked with, so Hui started her career in PayPal, was there for 12 years. And then she was also the founding COO of a firm. And then a firm went public, super successful. And then later I got recruited to become the president of Flexport Asia. And then moved to Hong Kong. I think the last time I saw her online was still in Hong Kong, and we lost her to Singapore. So now she's in Singapore. What the hell? But anyway, all good. And GGV is very lucky to have Hui, because GGV also, I'm a really big fan of Jenny and Hans, and now they got you. So that's super awesome. But I wanted to, for the next hour or so, I'm not going to start with like the first 30 minutes, just a fireside chat style. I have tons of questions for you. And then we're going to go to open Q&A. So Bonnie is our host tonight, and I will have to jump off in about 30 minutes to go and try to recruit this person for us. So I'm recruiting a COO. Anyway, so let's get started. Actually, I really just want you to talk, maybe just share a little bit about your story and your career. Started in the Valley and now end up in Singapore. How'd that come about? Like, tell us your life story so we're a little bit more background.
Happy to do that. But first of all, thank you all so much for giving me this time and your undivided attention. And I'm much more grateful, as Edith shared. I reached out to her because I've been a builder my entire life. And so at some point, you'll kind of derive at this place. So you'll build, and hopefully, you'll go on and sort of do your thing. And at the same time, you very much want to then give back to the ecosystem and the community. And so I didn't quite know how to plug in. And again, when I was at Flexport, the hours that I worked, crazy hours, so I never really had a chance to get to know a lot of folks. And so really honored to be a part of this. But my life story, all started, actually, everyone talks about PayPal, but I like to talk about the period like before that. So I went to school in the Valley. And again, in that first bubble, in that early 2000s, if you could walk and talk and sound like a competent person, you'd be offered a job. And so I did just that. I was offered a job as a product manager because I was technical enough, but not good enough to be a coder. So as such, at the time, the non-sexy role was called a product manager. So I did that, but experienced that first bubble and saw all the frenzies that went with it, where people were raising crazy money, did all the crazy parties and so forth. But that was how I ended up at PayPal. In fact, it was because my company folded, and the lawyer I worked very closely with, I literally was in tears because I never heard the word layoff. That's not something they teach you at school. And so learning that word and having to accept that truth, the lawyer I worked with came over and gave me a sticky. I still kept the sticky to this day and said, "Why are you crying? There's a job here waiting for you." And that sticky was a phone number to one of the folks at PayPal. And so I actually went there and I honestly did an interview. They asked me one question, which is, "Why should we like you?" I mean, this is super early days PayPal. So mind you, there weren't any Edith to sort of interview me, right? It was just a bunch of folks running around. And because I'd come highly recommended from folks that knew me, that was it. And so next thing you know, I was offered a job to be a product manager. And that's how I really started my career. First, an initial stint at a company that was trying to do Google Map, but way before the cloud happened. Subsequently was at PayPal. And as Edith mentioned, I was there for 12 years, first running product management. Again, PayPal being a B2B2C, I focus mostly on the B2C portion of the company. And from there, most people say, gosh, how did you plot out such a adventurous career? Because after Bay Area, I actually moved to Europe. I led risk management for Europe because we learned that the hard way that operating in a new market, you have to play with a very different set of rules. And that required us to become a bank. And to become a bank, you really need to have risk management spelled out as clearly as possible. And we also need to incorporate a lot of the requirements that the European regulators needed us to comply with. And so I actually lived in France, running a team in the UK and also in Dublin and Germany and so forth for a number of years. And so I didn't go there because of, like a very thoughtful career planning. It was because of this other guy called my husband. So I often tell people my career is sort of interesting in that I try to do my best of, you call it like make lemonade out of it. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Sorry, I had to say hi because as part of my giving back, I met Sarah because of an organization called the Women's Foundation, which I'm a proud graduate of, and this is where I met Sarah. But back to my story. So I ended up going to Europe because my husband and I met in school, and he was offered a fabulous job that paid more. Of course, things have changed since then. That's the good news. But that's how I ended up there. So I did that running risk management and helping them build out sort of the basics needed to obtain that banking license. And then subsequently, the same husband also brought us back to Hong Kong for the first time. So I actually served in a role after risk management. I actually had my second daughter in Hong Kong, first kid in Paris, second one in Hong Kong. She's actually a Hong Kong passport holder, which is a huge blessing. And that goes to tell that even though I left Hong Kong, I still have a home there. And I have plans to always make that as part of my life. So with that, ended up running operations in Asia because what happened after moving back to Hong Kong was the other financial crisis. And that was when in my career, I really needed to step up because that husband that had the job lost his job. And so this is how I ended up going to Shanghai. And then I ended up running operations. And while I was there, then I was recruited away. I got an email from my old colleague, a guy named Max Levchin, that, I don't remember what the email was like, but it was a bit like, hey, we're going to build this thing. You need to come back. And I'm like, why? You've been so successful. You're rich. You can retire. And he was like, no. We have something that we really need to work on together. And so it took a couple of months of me rearranging my life, just because by that time I have two little girls and a husband that actually found another job. And with that, I moved back to the Bay Area about 10 years ago to really build a firm from the ground up. And, I can definitely share a bit more, but my role there was very different, I'd say, because being so early, you really look after what I call the grown-up functions, right? Finance, HR, legal, compliance, and of course, the very responsible part of not just handing out money, because a firm lends money to consumers directly through merchants. It's about getting it back. In order to convince the VCs to give us more money, we really needed to show our ability to actually get that money back. And so that's how I ended up at a firm, and I served as the founding COO for about 6 years. And then same husband, that guy that I'm still married to, his old boss came back in the picture and offered him a fabulous job. And so we take turns. This is how I've been able to sort of, again, hopefully be that person I've always wanted to be, which is first me, then of course, mom and wife, and then leader who can actually serve a company. So we came back, I guess now about 3, maybe 4 years ago. And so how did I ended up at Flex4? I think if it's not obvious now, I'll tell you, I'm a horrible interviewer. I didn't interview for that job either. Right? I did not interview a firm clearly because I know the folks. Flex4 happened because I was thinking about coming back to Asia to accommodate my husband's career. And Chris Farrow, who is the general counsel or chief legal officer at Flex4, heard that I was coming back to the region and said, well then, you'll have to help us run Asia. And so very disqualified, but at the same time, super excited. And so ended up running Flex4 Asia for about 2 years. And then COVID happened where, again, having spent an entire career in fintech, I really felt a little bit out of my sort of comfort zone in dealing with what is happening right now with all the freight forwarding and the likes. And so after being there for about 2 years and also having sort of new opportunities come knocking. So besides working at GGV as a venture partner, I'm still building. Sarah knows this. Recently, I rejoined with a few of the PayPalians. We raised about $30 million Series A, and the new company is actually to fight climate change. So lots of varieties in my life. And so, and as a result of that too, Singapore made sense because there's a lot of support, especially for climate here in this country. So GGV happened after I left Flexport. First thing I did actually, as I mentioned, was I wanted to give back. And I also felt that I was much more aware of the community that I was surrounded by, which I had always had a lot of male colleagues because I worked in tech. But I really wanted to surround myself with a lot of amazing women leaders. And that's how I ended up joining the Women's Foundation for the time that I took a break. And also it was during that time when I learned that one of the fastest way to actually get to know the ecosystem, and also a lot of founders such as yourself, where I'm so inspired by, is to actually just shamelessly reach out to the like of Edith, because obviously, you know, in investing, they know a lot of folks. And so, and it was through that period where I realized that, you know, I wanted to, if I'm actually going to take a bit of a breather, I wanted to really get to know as much of the ecosystem as possible. And that's how I ended up at GGV. Again, it was through a mutual connection once again. And next thing you know, I sometimes get to do some investment now, and really just, it's been a wonderful journey to be able to not only have built, but continue to build, but at the same time, contribute back to the ecosystem and share what I've learned so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this particular conversation, we really would like to learn one on the investment side, and then also particular how you think about go to market when, like for Asia, especially the time you were at Flexport. But let's start with GGV. GGV actually really well known in both Silicon Valley and in China. Now you're in, even though Jenny is originally from Singapore, but she's mainly in China. I'd love to learn more about like GGV in terms of your focus, sort of typical check size, particular vertical you focus on, what stage, all the good stuff.
Yeah, so just a little bit of GGV. It's a fund that started actually in 2000. And again, the partners are 6 partners. And of that, there's a heavy part of Singapore influence because the 2 sort of most senior partners are from Singapore, but they've since then actually done a lot of investment, both in China and now in the US. And I learned about GGV because they were an investor in a firm. And so this is all part of it. And also once upon a time, I actually heard Jenny speak on a stage, and I was just so inspired by what she shared. And also because quite often we think that here in Asia, we have so much to learn from the West, but I actually think the other way, because I've actually worked and served in different regions where I actually think there's a lot for the West to learn from the East as well. And this is why of all the VCs, I actually decided to pick GGV. It is multi-stage fund. Initially, of course, it showed up much more on the growth part of it. But since then, as you can imagine, a lot of these funds, as they mature and grow, they're now, you know, we definitely write sort of the smaller check sizes for Series A. And of course, some of the partners, myself included, especially when it's not quite ready yet, what we've done is actually write personal checks into it. So really is this multi-stage. And of course, besides what I mentioned, which is China and US, there's been a lot of also activities in India, South America, and particularly right now, and why I even reached out to Edith recently too, I have a particular interest in Europe. And why Europe right now is because of some of the regulation that changed that is allowing open banking, right? The sharing of information and the way how banks work with each other. I actually see a lot of innovation coming out of that, which then I also see that happening in Southeast Asia. And so to answer your question about, you know, what vertical, fintech is what I know best. It's also the area that I whether I like it or not, I just see things and that I'm curious about. And the next thing you know, you just want to dig a little deeper. And so GGV actually invests in a variety of things. For example, recently, there's been a bit more on food tech. there's also been plenty of investments on the consumer side, right? And there, just to kind of talk about some of the factoids, right? About $9.2 billion under management, right? It has, if I remember correctly, about 400 or so companies under its portfolio, and about 70 unicorns to date, which is kind of cool. And then nearly 50 IPOs so far. So it's definitely, of all the funds, one that I'm really, really proud to be a part of. And of course, like I said, they invest across a multitude of things, including SaaS and enterprise solutions with a couple of the partners. But for me personally, because it's what I know. And of course, I also dabbled a bit into logistics, just because I now know a bit more than the average Joe to know just what I'm interested in. In fact, one of the first investments I made in this region is actually in logistics.
Awesome. So that's a perfect segue to go into sort of your experience in terms of go-to-market. I think many of the founders that we have in our cohort this time are thinking about, beyond Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong is a very small market. It's a great start. And natural is either go north or go south. And I guess a lot of times, like, you start with some of the similar, I guess, in terms of GDP and behavior, but of course, B2B and B2C is very, very different. But maybe zoom in a little bit more on Flexport. Obviously, more B2B is very specific logistic. So when you first got recruited to run Flexport Asia, like, what is your mind, like, in terms of framework? How did you think about it?
Yeah, I always start with, I tell people that you must think outside in, because there's so many things that you naturally want to control, right? I'd look at I look at our financials and I'm immediately like, well, what about those are things that I would say much, much more controllable. But one of the first things I wanted to do was actually get to know the people that I serve and in the region. And so specifically, when you think about freight forwarding, it's moving goods from A to B. And so the A, or the customers that we serve here, are the shippers, they're manufacturers. And so really, really understanding, because they're clearly very different from the folks that are receiving. Even the motion of pushing things out and receiving things, there's a difference of their wants and needs. And so that was my framework. And so I declared, it's kind of a cheeky thing. I was like, they're called shippers, or suppliers are called shippers. So everybody knows this about me. When I showed up at Flexport, and once I understood the difference between, origin and destination, and the different wants and needs, I declared shipper love. I said, we have to make sure that the shippers really could feel just how much we care for them. Because quite often, though, in the world of logistics, is that the paying customers are actually on the destination side. Because most freight is actually paid. For example, Nike will make an order. They will actually receive the goods from many, many factories or many, many suppliers. So in terms of the number of customers we have, right, when we talk about, let's say, 10,000 or whatever thousand, the majority, we have many, many more suppliers than they're the folks that are consigning the shipments. And so I knew that was something that was extremely powerful, that getting to know them and actually be able to build software of the many, many is where really software shines. I really wanted to make sure that was the value that I bring to the company. And again, if the shippers and the suppliers are happy, the consignee will be ever happy. This is all linked at the end of the day. So that was my framing of it. I really wanted to understand, who are the folks that I'm serving? What makes them really love us as a company? And how do I then go and build to that, right? Whether it's from a product standpoint, all the way to the people that I get to look after, and how do I develop them into just thinking about that versus always wondering, applying sort of the same methodologies of pleasing or making or fulfilling the wants and need of a consignee, which is on the other side of the ocean. They're very different once you actually double click into it.
So in this case, Asia is so big, right? So when you go after the manufacturers, should I just assume because it's manufacturing, so therefore China is the main market that you are going after, although you're based out of Hong Kong at the time?
Yes. So most of the work, the reason why we were based out of Hong Kong was because of the airport. And again, prior to some of the recent regulations, it's a free trade. So we had a lot of our goods from China, especially in the southern part. The ocean freight would leave out of Shenzhen or Yantian, And then for all the air shipments, it would leave out of Hong Kong, where you would just get trucked over. And so most of the work we were doing for Flexport, I think to this day too, the majority of goods, right, are going from Asia or China specifically to North America. So there are different routes, right? You can imagine all the different configurations in the world. And so that route is called TPEB. So that's the biggest route for Flexport. On the other hand, of course, we also ship goods to Europe. And so how do we go to market quite often is that you follow the wants and need of the people that is demanding your service.
Mm.
That's how you do it. So you could be very practical about it. And because again, someone needs something from A to B, and you will develop sort of superpowers or super capability, right? Because can you imagine all the configurations going from all the different parts of, well, even different continent will give you all sorts of capabilities. You can't be great at all of them. And so you definitely, I mean, again, knowing that majority of the goods are actually made from our side of the world, and again, China specifically, that became sort of one of our core competencies. And as a result of that, we continue to, we knew we wanted to be the best at serving that. At the same time, as we see our customers grow and their needs and wants changes, we work hard to then serve them so we can continue to grow with them.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's say, zoom in a little bit more on very even more specific. So you come into Asia. How should I think about it? Because sometimes, like your engineering team in the US, you're serving customers that mostly only speak Chinese, and then you learn that, oh wow, they want X, Y, and Z. Do you like, in terms of hire, and how do you actually bring in your engineer and product manager to really understand what's going on, and you being like the conduit back and forth, and then the communication time zone is like nightmare. Like, how do you actually think about like the team construction in terms of hiring, and make sure that the product really meet your customers' need?
Yeah, so all the things you describe, I said, I cannot declare love until I mean it. And so I ended up actually building an engineering team, the first one ever outside of the US for Flexport.
Hmm.
Because I realized that there were so many things lost in translation, and it was a lot more effort, right? Because it's very difficult, because on the, again, the act of when will my stuff arrive versus when are you going to show up to get rid of these things so I can actually start the next production, right? The number of customers that a manufacturer would actually have to fulfill versus, again, a consignee just waiting for that one shipment, very, very different needs. And so when I really took the time to understand the shippers' wants and need and declare love, I want them to not like us, I want them to love us. I was able to convince the company to actually allow me to build an engineering team, the first one ever outside of the US, specifically to serve the wants and need of not only these manufacturers, but also, if you think about it, on the supply side, right?
Mm.
How do we make sure we know when the goods are actually going on that boat, on that plane? How do we make sure the planning is done as successfully as possible so we can actually control or actually manage to whatever we're thinking about? You can look at an Excel spreadsheet and you can very much quickly tell where it is that you wish to do better, because you actually make a lot more money if you actually know how to write, how to schedule some of these shipments and the likes. And so I know a while back, Dawn also spoke about this, right? I mean, folks at Flexport knows that or anyone in freight forwarding knows that the origin part of the equation is extremely important, because a lot of the margin and how you actually consolidate or what do you end up scheduling makes a huge difference. And that type of skill set, know when to allocate what type of container and when, all of that work is done in Asia. And so for me, or for us, by the time we articulate everything, it ends up being like a very large spec that no one wants to read. And so my software that was then be on this side of the ocean so you can really, really understand and embrace all the things that we were experiencing, so we can build to it and then show the company how much more effective we can be. And I can, just share, hopefully enough, like productivity we more than doubled productivity as a result of that investment, right? Of course, if you want to ask the company to make such an investment, you do need to show the results, and the results speak for itself. And so right now there is still a thriving team. In fact, I was just actually WeChatting with the head of engineering of our Shenzhen office, but that's what I did.
Got it. Um, I will ask my last questions, and I'm sure like Bonnie have tons of other questions, and the rest of the all our founders have tons. I think in this case, it's interesting like to learn that you actually have the muscle to get headquarters to move engineer to let you create engineering team. That's rare, particular for Silicon Valley company, and then I guess I think a lot of our companies are thinking about engineering team maybe in Hong Kong and sometime in Taiwan, sometime in Vietnam, but more or less just like your mindset of framing it. So in this case, let's say if I'm interested in going to Southeast Asia or Vietnam, so your suggestion is also making sure at least the founding team understand the customer needs as you suggest. The methodology is the same, but then in this case it's completely different languages. So I would assume you probably start thinking, okay, how do I hire a local engineering lead, engineers, and then on the business side also, right? So yeah, so my question is like hiring, like any like do's and don'ts, and how do you actually pick the right person?
Yeah, so I can at least share with you for Flexpro. I wouldn't be as bullish. It all sounds good in the storytelling part of it, but at first you were just like, oh man, how am I gonna like really bedazzle with the result that I really want? And I knew that I could just keep going as is, basically, try to stay up as late as possible, make my team work as hard as possible. But it all happened when you find that one person that knows, that has a skill set and wants to actually build with you and bring that live, right? And so again, I just want to index that to spread yourself too thin is probably not a good idea for Flexport, because the majority, and I'm talking about 80+% of the goods that it ships, right, that it supports and facilitated is coming out of China. So that amount of quantity justifies easily why we needed a dedicated team, and even if you count the number of customers, but none of it could have come together until I hired my the guy I was telling you about. His name is Hong. He was a founder himself, right? Through my network, I sift through and I kept asking for people like this. He founded a company, he sold it. He was kind of retired in his early 20s. And I was like, you need to get your butt off that couch. You're too young to retire. And yes, it's been fun playing games, but don't you miss building? And why don't we build it together? And he knew the type of things he really wanted to develop because he never really got to the scale. And so we really had a great conversation. It took multiple conversations, but when you realize that this is someone that you want to build with, and the rest comes together. So the moral of the story is you can hypothesize and come up with all kinds of things like the best practices, but everything starts with like the right teammates or the right person that you can entrust, right, with this very thing. And at the same time, at least for Flexport, we really needed to, there was a lot of work that was done to make sure that we knew our orientation and how we can really add the most value, right? Because if you have a very strong culture where the paying customers on the other side, you tend to look to the other side. But the reality of it is the way to keep them happy is actually to serve the people that are actually here, and those are the manufacturers. One magical word from your manufacturer that says, gosh, these Flexporters are amazing, to the consignee, that magic happens. And so I don't know if I'm answering your questions, but particularly when it comes to like product and engineering, right? You just want to make sure that you don't actually pull the trigger too quickly. I will say that for businesses or marketing and the likes, right, where the language is, this is where those country managers. So instead of thinking about a trusted partner in engineering who knows like the back streets of how to hire engineers in China, it's a very different, again, him being a founder. So I always was pretty strategic at who I actually ended up hiring as my partner in crime, because he knew all those secret chat rooms where all the engineers would debate about complicated things. I didn't know any of that. I entrusted him to help me do just that. But I also know, for example, we have country managers that looked after each of our different locations. So for example, Shanghai's needs, right, that port and the port's requirements in the South are actually quite different. And so we also had not only the horizontals, we were thoughtful about how do we split the horizontal, like engineering, between origin and destination, We also had the verticals and GMs that really looked after the local nuance and the needs, and also to make sure that they can attract the right type of talent, right?
Yep.
From that part of, and again, China is huge. So, you know, the senior leadership team that I had in Shanghai was quite different from Shenzhen, for example, and of course, Hong Kong as well.
Got it. We all need to find our home, and I'm gonna go get my home now. So I'm gonna turn it over to Bonnie. But thank you so much, Hui, and apologize not able to hang out with you guys. But we'll catch up soon.
No worries. Bye.
Thanks, Edith. Well, I guess now Edith is off doing what Hui you did, finding your first country manager, finding the guy who knows everything. Another question is always like, before I let everybody have a chance to ask questions, I know everyone has a lot of questions because for a lot of these sessions, we've had to actually finish before everyone had a chance. But anyway, I do want to squeeze one question in, right? One of the things, you know, we always think of is coming out of Hong Kong. It's a relatively organized place. And just like coming out of the US, right? We all know everything, there's law and order, things seems to be more transparent. When you look at a place like China, where I'm assuming you've never lived there before, known to be, oh, you did? Okay, sorry. Before you got that first job there, right? Knowing that place, a bit of messiness, a very non-transparent, very different. What are some of the things you first did to make sure you are aware of, you know, even with the person, right? How do you trust that person, what they tell you as your first hire? What are some of the things you did before getting to that place?
Yeah, I actually think it's sort of a very similar, it's weird, but I'm going to just share very frankly. It's like how I explain to my children, right? Because nowadays, there's so much out there. If you ever just want to Google something, there are so many ways to kind of look at the same thing, right? And so I basically practicing the same thing. I knew that there's definitely different ways to look at it. And so that thing that we call active listening and shameless asking, at the end of the day, if you go and seek for more, right, more colors and whatnot, then hopefully you'll develop enough conviction to actually decide what really makes sense for your company because you just know enough. And so it's in that process of really, you know, asking from as many point of view as possible, be gracious and be grateful of getting that, really trying to listen for what your wants and needs are, and then trying to map those two together is basically the best practice. That's what I tell my children too, because they'll come back and say, did you know that? And they'll think it's gospel, right? But nowadays, it's actually harder and harder to really know because there are different versions of the truth. But the only truth is the one that you actually ended up, you know, believing in that actually works for you and your company or whatever it is that you're going through. I actually feel like I've had to explain some of this, having gone through it myself. And then sort of, again, it's about conviction, right? And you will get it wrong sometimes too, for sure. That's what the fun part of both starting a company is that you'll make your best effort, go talk to a bunch of people, you know, and you'll find that one thing that you think will work for you. You'll try it. And then it just ended up not working very well for you. And I'm happy to share in terms of hiring, right? One of my sharings is that I was in such a hurry to try to grow the region, right? I was like, I'm going to have shippers fall in love with us. And I know that they also control some of those decisions when it comes to freight. I want to win it all. But what I didn't realize was what we talked about, which is the local nuance, right? It's like, you can't send the same salesperson from the north to the south. Those sales don't work out. So I was a bit too trigger happy of hiring my sales team too early. And I was not thoughtful enough, right, of really understanding, like really understanding how do we actually not just go from serving them better. I immediately was a bit too eager to be like, so I've done a great job serving you, now do you want more? And it was the wrong decision. And so I ended up having to really make some changes to the sales team. And that was all on me, right? I hired a bunch of people and then realized that it wasn't working and then having to let them go. I still keep in touch with some of the folks, but I explained to them my mistakes. But look, it was much better on both fronts, but it's the type of things where, you know what, you can't get everything perfectly. You'll go and execute with the best intentions, but you have the right people. They will understand. And everyone, again, in this market right now, they're so happy that I actually ended that engagement, because they've all gone on to find amazing jobs. And right now, our freight forwarding industry is doing super well because of the current situation, right? So.
And that's actually very interesting, right? Because one other question I've heard from some of my companies is saying, no one likes to fire people. How do you maintain a good relationship after you fire someone? And at some point, when you realize that's the wrong person, what I also notice is people tend to drag on.
Yeah. No, so I almost wish that, my head of HR can be here to then explain, right? I've actually kept in touch with many of the people that I fired. And again, it's not because of, I don't use that word. It's just, it isn't the right fit. And quite often it's more of a when, right? All these folks I hire, I like to think that they all have some superpower, but that superpower, when deployed at the wrong time, right? And if it's not sort of fitting at that moment, it's actually very painful for both, because you're basically keeping someone with superpower. You almost want to diminish their superpower. And so, what I do, at least with the folks that I work with very closely, is that I always invest the time. And most people will know this about me, that when they come to a one-on-one with me, they're like, how do you find the energy? But I always say, if they're going to give me an hour of their undivided attention, they deserve that version of me where I'm not looking at the phone or being distracted and all sorts of like things that I could easily do at my level, right? I don't do that. I really think that it's actually a very, very good investment, but it's because of those very, very intimate and very, very sort of close interactions that I have with them. By the time when it's not working, both of us are coming to the same conclusion. And so it makes it very easy. And folks actually want to continue those conversations, those interactions. And so it actually makes it very easy. For example, there was someone in Singapore that I let go. And guess what? The minute he heard that I'm here, he's like, let's go get crabs. And I'm like, done. Finally, I have my vaccination tick, so I can do that. But that's an example where, and he went on and did amazing things. It doesn't mean that we should just badmouth each other. We just have to be sort of that honest with each other about what are we good at, and if that's the right thing to deploy for that company at that time. And sometimes we don't get it right.
That's great. And then now, actually, one last question from me before, I let. Now that you've flipped your head, right, getting ready to be on the other side, I'm sure you've now had a lot of interactions with your to-be colleagues or new colleagues. What are your kind of like first three things you really want to tell startups now that you've kind of seen some of the other sides or some of how they think, and then thinking back on how when you were raising, what can't you wait to tell startups? The secrets of, winning the hearts of VCs.
Well, I'll always say, look, after the call, then there's the call, right? First is, are you solving a real problem, or are you like a solution looking for a problem, right? So like, because sometimes some things are a little bit, it just seems either too niche. Some niche are really, really important, but some things just seems a little maybe frivolous. And so that's one of the things, but again, it depends on the person who's judging this, right? And so that's one. I've actually, I will share you with an example. Like, you'll have folks that are sharing, and they'll actually disagree with each other, right? So that just shows that the team dynamic isn't great. You have two co-founders, right, showing up to actually present. Well, first of all, they'll not only be looking at like the potential total addressable market, the problem and how the size of it, just the quality of the team, the team dynamic, because most of the time things ended up not working because of human dynamics, right? So you try to look as much of that as possible. And then third is just more along the lines of like, is this the company where this VC is going to add a ton of value? Because that's where, like, for example, if it's a company that, showed up because of whatever network, it doesn't matter if it's not something that this company or this VC can do as much work. Because often people will say it's not that first check, it's all the subsequent checks, right? And know that you're actually able to add value. So same thing, this is why I obviously have curiosity. I've actually invested in like, plant-based food, right? But I normally would would say that's because of my curiosity and just me trying to just get a pulse on it. But generally, the type of deals that I like to support and work on are the ones where I really feel I can add some value. And I know that with a little bit of that, you can see the exponential result, and hopefully, another unicorn or Pegasus or whatever is born. So those are the three things I'd say off the top of my head.
That's awesome.
People, synergy.
Yes, synergy. Make sure you're showing your best side in terms of your teamwork with your co-founders.